What's up guys, and welcome to the video. In this video we're going to be talking NextJS with Firebase Auth. Now by the end of this video you're going to be able to integrate this into your application using server-side rendering to make it fast and easy to authenticate those users. Now if that sounds like something you want to learn, stick around as we dig into the code. So before we get started creating our NextJS application and including Firebase, we actually need to create our application in the Firebase console. So go ahead and log into your Firebase console and click Add Project. And then obviously just give it a name. We'll use NextJS with Firebase Auth. And click Continue. It's going to ask if you want to use analytics in the project, and that's totally up to you. I prefer to turn this off because I don't need analytics on whether or not people are crashing or if any events have been triggered or predict user behavior. Once you click Create Project, it will take a few seconds to build and it will provision some resources for us and basically create our users table that we can use throughout this lesson. Now once it's done, go ahead and click Continue and you should see this getting started with your app. So one thing that we're going to do is we're not going to be using Android or iOS or Unity. We're going to be using this web version because obviously Next.js plus serverless functions is the web. So go ahead and click that and give it a name. So let's call it Next.js application. And we don't need Firebase hosting because Versailles is our host of choice. So go ahead and click Register App. Now, once you've registered the app, it's going to give you this Firebase configuration. The API key, auth domain, database URL, project ID, the storage bucket, message sender ID, and the app ID. So go ahead, take these, write them down somewhere, store them somewhere safe, and when we get to creating the application, we'll come back and use these. So once you've done that, go ahead and click Continue to Console. And now we need to actually handle the authentication. Now in this version, the authentication is going to be just email and password, but you could add any of the other features they have, including Twitter, GitHub, Facebook, etc., with minimal extra code. So go ahead and click Authentication and click Sign In method here, and you'll see that it's currently disabled. So if we built this code right now and try to create a user or log in, it would just say not allowed. So go ahead and click this button here and click Enable. Now you do have the option to do email link, password sign in, but it's a bit of a pain in my opinion. And from a user standpoint, there's nothing more frustrating than attempting to log in and having to go back into your email, click a link to get back into your application. So we're going to leave that off and just click Save. Now at this point, we're actually ready to handle the authentication. Now we only have one more thing to do, and that's to use the Firebase admin screens to take care of whether or not they're authorized and they have a token that is valid. So we'll do that next, and then we'll start coding. At this point, I'm at the main screen where you log into your Firebase console. From here, you're going to click the cog here and click Project Settings, and then select Service Accounts. Once you've clicked that, you're going to go ahead and generate a new private key at the bottom. And this gives you an example of how to do it in Node.js, but just go ahead and click this private key. It's going to say your private key gives you access to your projects and services. Keep it confidential and never store it in a public repository. So make sure you do that and then hit Generate Key. And what will happen is down here, you can actually see that there's a Next.js Firebase JSON that's been downloaded, and that contains our secret information that we're going to use in our application. So now we're actually ready to start coding. So let's go ahead and move to Visual Studio Code and start creating our authentication through Next.js. So here we are in our Visual Studio Code with a basic Next.js app created through the boilerplate create next app. Now the only thing I've done is imported this secrets file, and that is the file that is provided to you by Google when you set up the Firebase admin, and it should be stored securely, but in this example I'm just going to keep it on the front end. So now we need to talk about what we're actually using. So we're going to be using 3 packages to handle the authentication, and then we're going to use Chakra UI to do our CSS. So let's install these first, and it's npm install firebase, firebase admin, and then Nookies. Now, if you've never used Nookies before, it is a NextJS cookie helper that can handle things like SSR, as well as being lightweight, and it's perfect for authentication, which is exactly what we want. So now we've done that, we need to install our Chakra UI. So we can do npm install at Chakra UI /core at emotion /core at emotion /styled and emotion beaming. So now we've installed everything that we need to create our application. So let's talk about what we're going to do. So first we're going to create a few files. We're going to create one called auth.js. We're going to create one called firebaseClient.js and one called firebase admin. And the admin is going to take care of decrypting and making sure that they're allowed in our application. The client is going to set up our auth so we can actually authenticate somebody. And this auth is going to wrap everything in our application in an auth context and use that to handle all authentication throughout the whole entire app. So let's begin with the Firebase client because it's the quickest and it's the easiest. So let's go ahead and just drop in a import for Firebase. And then let's also import the Firebase config, which if you remember correctly is from the web piece of the application when you first sign up for Firebase. And if you've forgotten, just rewind the video and I'll show you where it is. But it will have API keys, auth domain, database URL, project ID, storage bucket, message sender ID, and the app ID. So we can just drop that in there and hit save. Then we're going to create a default function that we're going to export out, and we're going to call this Firebase Client. And that Firebase Client is going to take no props, but it is going to do a quick check. It's going to say if the firebase.apps.length does not exist, then we're going to do firebase.initialize app and then toss in the Firebase config. And that's everything that we need for a Firebase client. We're literally just initializing it and there's nothing else for it to do. So let's do our Firebase admin now. So the Firebase admin starts the same way. We're going to import the admin, and that's going to come from Firebase admin. And then we're going to take the service account, and that is the secret.json file that is there. And that was the one that came from the Firebase admin screen that you should be keeping secret at all times. Then we're going to do an export, and we're going to export the const called verify ID token. And we're going to pass it in the token. And then we're going to make a check and say if the admin.apps.length does not exist, we'll do an admin.initialize app. And this is just to help with hot reload. Occasionally you may find, if you don't include this piece of code, that it will try and initialize it multiple times, causing errors. So we've got credential here. We're going to do admin.credential.cert, and then the service account that we've imported. And then we're going to use the database URL. Now the database URL is going to come right from our client. And it's right here. So just go ahead and copy and paste that into your Firebase admin. And that's it for that part. But we're not actually doing anything with this code. We're literally just initializing the admin app. So let's do something. So we're going to do a return here, and we're just going to say admin.auth. And then we're going to say dot verify ID token, which is the JWT. And if it does actually verify the JWT, that's the promise and it's done. else it will throw an error message. So let's go ahead and catch that and say, let's just throw the error. And then we just need one more close and we're good. So this essentially does is it goes to the admin, it goes to the auth, it verifies the token, which is a JWT. If it works successfully, nothing bad happens, else we catch the error message. So now we've got all of that. Now we actually need to use the auth.js. So let's go ahead and create our auth context. So first let's import React and then use state, and we'll take use effect. We'll also use context, create context, and that's all coming from React. Then we're also going to import nookies to handle our cookies. And then we're also going to import the Firebase client. I can't help but laugh at nookies. And maybe I'm saying it wrong, but that's what it says. And then import Firebase from the Firebase app, which you can do by doing /app. And then we'll also import Firebase Auth. And we'll also create our auth context here. So we're just going to do auth context is equal to create context. And that's it. That's all we need to do for that. And then we'll add something in there in a second. So we're going to export a const here called auth provider. And the auth provider is going to take in children. And those children are going to then be passed along. I'm having trouble with my arrow key today, apparently. Then we're going to initialize the Firebase client. So now Firebase is running. Then we can set a use state here. We'll have a user and a set user. And we'll equal those to use state. And the value in the beginning will be null. And then we can use use effect. And the use effect is going to handle the actual part where we check to see if the ID token has changed. So you're going to do a return firebase.auth and then open and close parentheses and then dot. And if you look here, there's one called onIDChanged. Go ahead and use that. And then we're going to do an asynchronous function that takes in the user and says, if there is no user, we're going to set the user to null. We're going to set nookies to basically no cookie. So you use the word undefined first, then you do a comma, and then we set our token. And we're just going to set the token to an empty string. And then we'll close out with a set of braces. And then we can return. And that's it. But what happens if there is a user? I hear you cry. Well, if there is a user here, we're just going to set token equal to await user.get ID token. Then we'll set the user. Instead of setting it to null like we did here, we'll go ahead and set the user to the actual user. Then, on top of that, we'll get our nookies here and we'll set them to undefined token. And then we'll set the token instead of an empty string. And then we'll open and close right there. And then to make sure that our use effect only runs the single time, we want to make sure that we're in our closing one here and add in our empty array. So at this point, we just need to return a few things. So let's go ahead and return our auth context now. So if you remember, we created this auth context here, but we're going to return that now. So we're going to do auth context.provider. And the value is going to be equal to the user. And then inside of that, we're going to then pass in the children. And that takes care of that. So everything that's being passed in, which is our whole application, is basically going to be a child here, and it's going to always be wrapped in this provider. So now we have that. We just have one more thing to do, and that's to export this out. So export const use auth, and we're going to set that equal to use context auth context. And that's it. Now we have auth ready to go. So before we do anything else, I want to make sure that we understand what's going to happen. So inside of this app.js file, we're actually going to wrap everything up in this auth context so that it is available regardless to what page you're on. And then we're going to modify this index.js, and then we're going to do the login screen and then an authenticated route. So let's get moving. So let's go inside our app.js file, which will look something similar to this. So go ahead and remove this styles, and let's import our auth provider. And you can do that by just doing auth provider. And then we set that from .auth. And while we're here, we'll also add in a theme provider, which has nothing to do with auth, but it does have to do with Chakra UI, and we want to be able to use that. And we'll also import the CSS reset, and they're going to come from Chakra UI. So now what we need to do is actually wrap this all up in our, right here. Instead of just returning this comment, we're going to wrap everything up in the theme provider, the CSS reset, and this auth provider. So to do that, what we're going to do here is just open these parentheses like this, and we're going to do theme provider, then CSS reset, then auth provider, and then we're going to put this component piece here right inside. So now everything that is used by this application will be wrapped in the theme provider. It will have CSS reset, it will have an auth provider, and then any component will be rendered inside of that. So now we are pretty much good to go. But first, I want to create a component here, and the component is just going to wrap the whole page in Flex, because Flex makes everything easier, or at least that's the rumor. So let's go ahead and import React from React. And then let's go ahead and import Flex, and that's going to come from Chakra UI core. And then we can just do an export default function, and we're going to call it container. And we're going to take in the children, so essentially the whole app again. And we're going to return a fragment, and then inside of that fragment we're going to do flex as main. Then we're going to justify the content to center. The flex direction is going to be column, and then we'll add a little padding around the sides of 8, which is the equivalent of 2 rem, I think. I can never remember off the top of my head. And then we can add the children. And there we go. So now we have this nice container that we can use, and we can add that to our app.js, and we won't have to worry about it. So now let's go to our index.js file where most of this is going to happen. And let's go ahead and delete everything out here. We don't need any of this. And we don't need any of this. And let's start by importing some React pieces that we're going to need, which is just React. And then let's import link from NextLink. And let's import the use auth, which is what we exported from our auth. And then we also need to import container from our components. And then we just need some Chakra UI magic. So we're going to import flex box. button, text, headings, and stack. And they all come from Chakra UI core. And obviously you can change that to whatever you want. I just prefer Chakra UI, but if you're a Tailwind guy or you're a vanilla CSS, go for it. But it's just easier for me to use Chakra UI. So now we have this, we're going to do const here, and we're going to set the user, and we're just going to say equals use auth. So now we have this user, we'll be able to use that in this to decide some conditional rendering. So let's go ahead and wrap everything in our container, and then everything inside of Flex again. And then let's use a box here. And the box is going to have a width of, say, 500 and a padding of, say, I don't know, 4. And then margin on the top of 12. And we'll set MX equal to auto. So now we have that. We can now have a heading inside of here. And we'll do a H2. And we'll align the text in the center. And all we're going to say is welcome to the home page. And that's just to say hello and welcome. We're a friendly bunch here. So now what we're going to do is we're going to do a little bit of conditional rendering here. We're going to do a text again. And inside of this text, we're going to do some conditions here. So first, let's just add a margin to the top. And we're going to set that to 8. Every number but 8, apparently. And then we're going to align it in the center. So now we have that. Now we can do our condition here. And the condition is going to be user ID, $sign here. And then open our parentheses and say user. User.uid, else we'll just say no user signed in. So nice and simple, nothing too crazy. I don't want to go too far into styling and design and everything like that. This is just to show you how you can integrate this into your application. And in the future, we're going to do a big old crash course where we're going to be using FaunaDB and Firebase Auth to create a CRUD app that's going to be pretty awesome, and it's coming out real soon. So now we're going to use this stack. And the stack basically, if you've not heard from me a million times, is a way to bundle all of your elements together. And in this case, we're going to put them all in a line. So let's make this 8 as well. And align the items in the center. And let's justify them too in the center. Ooh, I'm having all sorts of problems typing. There we go. And then is in line. And then finally, we'll set the width equal to 100%. And now we have that. What we're going to do is we're going to have 2 buttons here. We're going to have the first button, and that's going to go to our authenticated route. The second button is going to be the login button. That's going to take us to the login form. Now, we want to disable them based upon what somebody's doing. So if they're already logged in, we don't want them to log in again. And if they're not logged in, we totally want them to log in. So we're going to do a button here. I'm going to say variant equals solid. Variant color equals blue. We're going to set the width equal to 100%. And finally, we're going to say is disabled. And then what we're going to do is just do if there's no user. And then inside of that, we can do a link. And we'll do href equal to authenticated, which we don't have yet, but that's where our authenticated route's going to go. And we're going to say A, go to authenticated route. And that's it. And then we can just copy and paste this button to save time. There we go. And we'll make this green. And we'll say disabled if there is a user. And then here we'll just go to /login and we'll say login. And we can hit save. And now we have a nice home screen that we can look at. So let's go ahead and launch the code and see how it looks so far. So here we are in our Next.js app. And as you can see, this is working as expected. This one is disabled right now, and this one is enabled. So let's go ahead, go back to the code and add the actual ability to log in so that we can see if this part's working, as well as showing you how you can do the authentication. So we're back in the code, and let's go ahead and create a new page here, and we're going to call it login.js. Then we're going to import React, as well as useState, and that's obviously coming from React. Then we're going to import the Firebase client that we created. And we're also going to import Firebase, and that's coming from the Firebase/app. And we're going to import Firebase Auth. And then we're going to import our Chakra UI. And we're going to need quite a few things here. So we're going to need a box, flex, input, form control, form label, form helper text, stack, button, head, and use toast. So I'm going to import all of these, and then you can come back and check to make sure that you've imported them all correctly. Okay, so here we are. Box, flex, input, form control, form label, form helper text, stack, button, heading, use toast. Obviously, you can use a different UI library as I've stated, but this is what we're going to use for this example. So now we're going to type in export default function. We're going to do login, and then we're going to pass in some props. Actually, we're not going to pass in any props because it's the login form. And then we're going to call firebaseClient here. And then we're going to do const toast equals use toast. And we're going to use toast for any error messages. So if a user tries to log in with the same email address, we're going to throw an error message. If they type in the wrong password, we're going to throw an error message. So essentially, we're going to just make sure that we are handling the errors. Then we're going to set two sets of states, one for the email. We're going to set that to empty string, and then one for our password. And we'll call that pass. And then we'll set the state to that one, also to the same. Just an empty string. Okay, so now we're ready to return something. So let's go ahead and return. First, let's wrap everything in flex, and then everything in box. And the box is going to be the same width as the previous one, so it's 500. We're going to add padding of 4. And then mx equals auto. Then we're going to add a heading, just as we've done previously, and we're just going to say this is a h2. And we're going to align the text to center. And then we'll call this hello. And then we'll call this login. And then inside of the form, so we're going to use something called form control here. And we're going to say is required. And essentially this just puts an asterisk on the form. And then we're going to add a form label. And the form label is going to be HTML. And that's going to be for our email. So you just do HTML4 and then email. And then we can just add the word email address here. And then for the input part of this form, we're going to do an input. We're going to do an on change. And we're going to say equal. And then we're going to open this and say E. And then basically we're just going to set the email to whatever this gets changed to. So you just do set email and then e.target.value. And that takes care of anything that happens in this form. Then we need to, let's just close this out so we don't get confused. And then we need to do a type, and we'll set this to email so that the HTML type is correct. And then we'll do an ID, and we'll set this to email address. The value will equal email. And finally, we'll do a descript on the area. Described by, and then we'll do email helper text. And there we go. So this input essentially will take this, and every time someone types in there, we'll just change the target value. So now we need to do the same one, but we just need to do it for passwords. So just go ahead and take this form control and just go ahead and paste it underneath and say is required, and make this password and this word password. And then with set email is just going to be set pass. And then the type is password. And the ID is pass. The value is pass. And this will be password helper. So now we have that. Now what we need to do is do a couple buttons here. One's going to be login, and one of them's just going to be the ability to sign up. So we can do a stack here, and we're going to do justify equal in the center. We'll do an empty of 6. We'll do is inline again, so they're both next to each other, and we'll just add a nice bit of spacing on each element of 10. So now we have that. What we actually need to do now is create our buttons. So button number 1 is going to just have a min width of 40%. And then we'll just set the variant to a color. So solid, variant color. I like blue. And then we're going to say is disabled. And we're going to say equal to email is equal to an empty string, or pass is equal to an empty string. So if one of those is empty, you ain't coming in here. Then we can say on click. And the on click is going to do a bit of a long thing here. We're going to do asynchronous function that's going to essentially just call Firebase. So we can open this up, and we're just going to say await firebase.auth.create user with email and password, email, comma, pass, dot then. We're going to do a function here, and we're just going to say window.location.ref. So basically we're just going to redirect them back to the home screen if it's successful. And then if it's not, we can do a catch here and say function, and then the error, and then we'll do const message equals error.message, and this will be the message back from Firebase. And then we can use toast, which if you remember at the top, we imported this toast here. When you use that, I'm going to just prompt the user that, hey, you did something. So we're going to do a title, and we'll just say an error occurred, then do a comma, and then we're going to do a description, and we'll set that to the message. And then we'll do status, and we'll set this to error in a string. And then we'll set the duration to, I don't know, 9,000, sorry, not 900, because it'll barely be visible. And then set that to true. Now that's a lot, right? And then we'll just say create account. And it does seem like a lot, so let's just talk about it one more time. So what we're doing is saying when they click this button and the email and password is filled out, I want to go ahead and create the user with email and passwords and pass in the email and the password. Then if it's successful, redirect me back to the home screen, else catch the error message on screen, display it in a toast so the user can actually handle it themselves. So now we've done that, we can actually just copy and paste this, and we could create a component out of this, but to save time, we won't do that today, and we'll just say this one is a login. And the only change that you actually have to make here is the auth here. You're just going to do sign in. Sign in with email and password. And the rest can stay the same. We're just going to redirect them back here, and we'll catch it if there's an error, and we'll just set this to login. And that, my friend, is the login page. Let's go back to the website and see if we can actually successfully log in. So here we are in our little login screen here. We have email and password. So let's go ahead and just try logging in. So first, let's create an account. Test 1, 2, 3, 4 exclamation point, and click create account. The email is already in use by another account, which is true because I've tested this a couple times. So let's do a different email. And there we go. We now have a user ID in here, and the login is now disabled. So let's go and see about creating an authenticated route that we can use, and then let's test the full flow from start to finish. So here we are back in the application, and I've just created an authenticated.js file, and we're going to use that with some server-side rendering to have our users authenticated and then be able to do things in our app. So first, import React and also Nookies from Nookies. Then we're going to import the verify ID token that we created, and that's in the Firebase admin. And we're also going to import firebaseClient, and that's going to come from firebaseClient. And then we also need to import just Firebase app. So import Firebase from Firebase/app. And then we just need our handy dandy Chakra UI. So we're just going to do a box, flex, text, heading, and one button. And we'll just do from Chakra UI core. And we're good to go. So let's create a function here. And the function is going to be called, as you guessed it, authenticated. Now this function is going to take in a session. So first we'll do firebaseClient. And then we'll say if there's a session. So our nice happy path here. We're going to return something. And inside of here, we're going to do another flex. And we're going to use the same box we've used every single time and the same heading. So let's just go ahead and copy and paste those in. There we go. Make sure we close out that box. And inside this heading, we'll just say authenticated. So the user knows they are authenticated. Then what we can do here is just do some text and say text align equals center. And then we'll just dump out the session values. And then what we'll do then is say, you can do whatever you want now. So we'll just give them a nice friendly message that says, you can do anything, now you are authenticated. And then we'll create another box here. And we'll just do the same as before. We'll drop this in here. And we'll close out the box. And inside of this box, what we're going to do is just have a button that says you want to sign out. So this button is just going to do a nice, easy sign out, which is surprisingly easy. We're just going to do a width of 100%. And then we're going to set the variant color and all that jazz. So we'll set this to solid. And we'll set the color equal to red. And then now we can do our onClick handler, and we'll do onClick. And we're going to do something similar to the other one. We're going to do an async that's going to have a function here. And that function is just going to do await firebase.auth.signout. And then window.ref is going to go back to the home screen. So let's do that. And now we have this button. We can just close this out and say sign out, baby. And now we need to do the else part, right? So if we just hit save here, we have this if, which comes down to here, but we don't know what happens if there is no session. So we'll just do an else here. And this could be because it's still loading in. But remember, we're about to do some server-side rendering, which I know everybody loves. So we'll just do a box here, and we'll just say, I don't know, text, loading. Easy. So now we have all of this. Now we can actually do our server-side props. So let's do them. Export async function, get server-side props. And then we're going to pass in the context. Then we're going to do a try here, and we're going to say, hey, try and do this for me. First, let's get cookies from Nookies. And we're just going to say context. And then const token equals await. Verify ID token and the cookies.token. So essentially we're just taking what's in this cookie, looking for the token, and then verifying that it's actually a proper person. Then we can take the UID and email, and that's from the token. And then we can return a props here, and we're just going to say props, and then open session, and then we'll do a template that says your email is $email, and your UID is UID. So we have that, and that's essentially our happy path here. And then we'll catch an error. And what we'll do here is we'll do context.res.writeHead. And we'll set it to a 302, and we're just going to send them back to the login screen. Because at this point, there's only two options. Something really bad has happened, and we need them to re-authenticate, or something really bad has happened, and we need them to authenticate. So essentially, yeah, we don't have a cookie, and the only time we don't have a cookie is when we need them to re-authenticate for some reason. Then we just close this out, and then we just export default authenticated, and we are good to go. So let's go back to our code here and look at what our website looks like and see if we're good to go. So here we are back in our application. I've restarted the application, so let's go and log in. So let's just try to log in here. Is that my password? Got it right on the first try. And then click go to authenticated route. And over here you can see we are authenticated. Your email is jamesperkins@hey.com and your UID is this. You do anything now. Wow, good spelling. You can do anything now. You're authenticated. And if we click this sign out button, we're prompted to log back in. And I just wanted to show you that toast a bit more and show you how the error handling works. So when you click the login, if we just type James Perkins at hey.com and we just throw in a bunk password and click login, down here you'll see the password is invalid or the user does not have a password. And then we can do something like test 12345 create account. And then we got this one that says the email address is already in use by another account. Or we could just forget the malformed like this and say create account, and it says this email address is badly formatted. So we get lots of error handling thanks to Firebase already, and that's it. You've created this application that you can now use authentication, nookies, aka cookies, and Firebase to create an awesome Next.js app. So there we go, guys. Firebase Auth, Next.js working in harmony. And it's so easy to implement, it's so fast, and using server-side rendering means that we can use this anywhere. Now, if you did enjoy this video, make sure to drop it a like, tell your friends about it, make sure you subscribe to the channel, and until next time, see ya!